Hi and welcome back. This is Police Stories Podcast. It's a series of short stories about my 28-year career in the UK police force. Hope you're enjoying it so far. Welcome if this is your first time. Possibly want to start at the beginning if it is, but if not, no worries. Thanks for the downloads this week. Very good on the download front again, and some nice comments on YouTube. Thank you. Don't forget you can go on YouTube so that you can ask questions or make comments. And also, as you know, we're on all the other various platforms. So something a little bit different this week, perhaps. We're going to talk about a couple of incidents, and they do involve diving, but there's some quite interesting backstories. And I think the first one, in a weird sort of way, if you've got a sense of humour like me, you might find it quite amusing. But it's certainly one of the stranger jobs that I did. So we talked about before that, the dive team isn't available kind of 24 hours a day. Divers aren't just sitting there waiting to leap in their truck and run off and rescue someone because, as we've discussed several times, it just doesn't work like that. Generally you work during the days, and there's also a call-out facility if it's a weekend. We generally didn't work weekends, but, most things could wait depending on what it was. A lot of the time there was kind of loose information that there might be, a weapon, for example, in a river or something from a stabbing or a robbery or a murder. And it might just be that the SIO, the senior investigating officer, the detective in charge of that investigation, knows that the offender who committed the offence, walked away along a path, that was beside a river, for example. So if he or she has not come up with the murder weapon yet, they may well task us to dive. So quite often you could dive and not actually know whether, the item you were looking for was in that location. So that could be a bit frustrating. There was no guarantee. So sometimes, we were told we're 90% sure it's not in there, but we've looked everywhere else. This is the last place. We have to rule it out. So you'd go in thinking, we're probably wasting our time here, but you couldn't think like that. You had to be sure it was in there and do your absolutely best search. And then quite often we would then turn up, the weapon that we were after. So, it was a little bit different than that. But certainly on weekends, there was a call-out facility. So if it was felt it was a bit more urgent, then, you could have a call and be at home. But it took a good 2 hours to get the team together because, people lived away from London and lived all over the place. So certainly it could take a while, to get together. So this job was particularly unusual, and I'll tell you the backstory first because then it'll become apparent. So picture the scene. It's a central London hospital, and it's one that has a surgical wing, ward, whatever you call it. They carry out various surgeries at this hospital, and part of those surgeries involve amputations of limbs for various reasons. I'm not a doctor, obviously, but I'd imagine there could be various reasons, perhaps some sort of infection, or maybe a cancer or something. But for whatever reason, they carried out multiple amputations of limbs at this hospital. Now, I didn't know this until this job, but I'd never really thought about it. It's not the sort of thing you think about. I wonder what happens to all those limbs, But when this job came up, it became apparent that but most of those limbs, or I think all of those limbs, again, feel free to correct me if you know different, are incinerated, and a lot of the hospitals have large incinerators, very, very hot fires that burn, and these limbs go into the incinerators, and get burnt, and that's that. But you have a team at the hospital that obviously run that incinerator, presumably have to, manage it and make sure it's at the correct temperature and carry out various safety procedures and what have you, and then actually physically put those limbs into what are effectively ovens, aren't they, to dispose of them. Now, my understanding is that at the beginning of the day, there was a fairly lengthy startup procedure to get the incinerator going, and then presumably to get it up to a working temperature before it was actually, able to be used. And equally, at the end of the day, I don't think you could just sort of switch the off button and walk out. Again, I think it was at least an hour of procedure of sort of shutdown and cool down periods, and I guess making sure everything was safe before you left for the day, if that was your job. So I'm chuckling already, and hopefully you are as well, as opposed to thinking that I'm a bit sick in the head. But so picture the scene. You work in that incinerator, and you've got, it must be a bizarre job, you know, you've got this big trolley full of, I don't know, legs, arms, whatever, and you're working your way through them, putting them in the incinerator throughout the day. And then at the end of the day, you're looking forward to going home, and it's the weekend, perhaps, you know. In fact, it was the weekend, definitely. And you carry out your shutdown procedure. The incinerator's all shut down, it's cooling down, it's safe. You're about to walk out the door, and then you notice that there is a leg left still that you have, I don't know, forgotten, missed, whatever, you know. I'm not sure whether they have like leg storage drawers or quite how it works, but, you know, for whatever reason, they realised that there was a leg left at the end of the day. Now, put yourselves in their shoes. What would you do? I would think there's several options. Perhaps put the leg in a fridge overnight and then, you know, put it through the following day. Or, you know, I don't know how tightly this stuff is controlled in terms of, you know, does someone come down and check that you've burnt all the legs in the day? This is a bizarre conversation, isn't it? But, or, you know, the other option is you take that leg because you've now shut down the incinerators and you can't be bothered. You leave the hospital with the leg, I assume in some sort of bag and trying to disguise it. You walk to the canal that runs along the back of the hospital. You have a little look around and make sure no one's watching, and then you throw the leg in the canal. So they're probably your two options. I suspect the first one is possibly in line with procedures in terms of just, you know, incinerating it the following day. The second one, I would suggest, is possibly not in the manual for people that burn limbs in incinerators, if there is such a thing. And they're bound to be, isn't there, you know? So here is myself sat at home on a Saturday or Sunday. It was definitely the weekend. I get a phone call from the sergeant who says there's a call out. It's a bit of a weird one. Can you make your way into the base? You know, so sure, yeah. So I jump in the car or the train or whatever and make my way in, and we get kitted up and we head off to this hospital. And on the way, we get the briefing from the sergeant who explains what's happened. And a member of public has seen a person in a hospital uniform, so he was particularly clever about, you know, concealing his identity by wearing his full uniform, probably with a name badge on, and then, you know, was seen by this member of the public opening a bag, taking out a leg. Now, I don't actually know whether it was a leg sort of below the knee, or whether it was, you know, from the thigh down, an entire leg. I'm not sure. I'm thinking below the knee probably, but anyway, he takes this leg and throws it into the canal, thinking, I can't be bothered to start up the incinerator again. So we're kind of looking at each other, the divers, going, right, this is a little bit different. And it posed a few issues. So basically the canal that ran out the back of the hospital, as most London canals, was quite busy with boat traffic. So that certainly brings up a few issues in terms of, you know, the safety of the divers. You cannot have boats, you know, running over the top of divers' heads. It's just not deep enough, you know, and it's something we would avoid anyway. If it was 10 metres deep, maybe, but most canals are 2 to 3 metres deep. So you have to keep stopping your search to get your divers, you know, to one side of the canal while you allow the boats to pass. And you also have to post somebody to act as a safety lookout, to give you a shout, basically, firstly when the boats are coming, and secondly to sort of wave the boats to stop if it comes at the worst possible time where the diver is on the far side of the canal. And for example, there was a bend, you know, now canal boats and things don't go very fast, but in some of the places we worked, you know, it was also liable that you could have the odd muppet, shall we say, who would be on a, you know, a much faster boat. Now they should be going like literally 3 knots, about sort of 2 or 3 mile an hour, but occasionally we would have one that would come down at 10 or 15 knots, just being an idiot, you know, and sort of running up his engine, or had a mini speedboat or whatever. So it wasn't uncommon to find your diver the far side of the canal with his line attached, don't forget, of course, to his attendant, who's now 20 metres away on the other side of the canal, and have a boat razzing round the corner and having your safety on the bridge, even though he's got the big signs up saying caution police divers and what have you, shouting and jumping and waving and, you know, trying to stop that boat whilst also saying to you, get the diver in, you know. So that was the first issue. There was a series of pontoons, you know, floating walkways that was on the edge of this canal, because there were some boats moored. So boats moored can be a pain as well. And you also have to try and figure out, well, how far can you throw a leg? Now, normally we would have a pretty good idea of, depending on the size of weapon or phone, you know, how far you can throw it. And in fact, at some occasions, you know, we might have had a few tests that what's the furthest we think we can throw this thing, to try and, you know, give us an idea. And whatever we thought it was, we'd add 10 metres. You know, you have to put in an overlap, because knowing our luck, you know, it would be some Olympic shot putter who'd thrown the item in, you know, and we thought we're being clever, sort of working in a small area, and he or she has thrown it beyond our search area. So yeah, there's always an overlap. But there wasn't a manual, strangely, for how far somebody could throw a leg, because there's a number of things at play there. You know, as I said, how big is the leg? How strong is the person? You know, we were thinking probably just plopped it in, you know, like 6 feet from him, because it's quite a heavy item, I suspect. But we didn't have any spare legs, you know, to test the theory. So we had to just, you know, go with it. And of course, the next thing is, we talked about the two main search patterns that we use, being the arc search for big items, bodies. And it works brilliantly for that, you know, because you're effectively waiting to swim into the body. But imagine if you're searching for a leg with an arc search, and you know, Sod's Law says that the leg will be lying directly in line with you, offering it the narrowest possible profile for you to find with your hands as you're sweeping along the bottom. Don't forget, this bottom consists of, you know, 2 or 3 feet deep of old cans, bricks, bottles, you know, mopeds, shopping trolleys, you know, everything and anything you can think of is in there. So it's not like it's a nice flat gravel bottom with nothing else to find. You know, maybe you could do an arc search for it, but the thinking was that we just couldn't do that for this particular search. We were thinking we were going to have to jackstay search it, which, if you remember, is a lot slower process. That's where you lay the weighted line along the bottom with a heavy weight either end of it, and you search up and down the jackstay with one hand on the jackstay for your reference point and one hand searching. And when you get to the far end, the heavy weight, you pick it up, you move it 1 metre to the side, you put it down, and you search back along your line. And that's how you go. You concertina your way across the sort of canal or whatever it was, moving the heavy weight each time you've completed a sweep on the far end. So it was decided that we would do a jackstay search for this item, and we knew that you know, that was going to slow things down and take a lot longer, but we didn't want to risk an arc search and then miss it. So I can't remember the order of the divers on the day. I think I was maybe about second or third diver. We'd already put in you know, a couple of divers, and they'd had no luck. So I went in, and it just so happened that I was diving sort of alongside one of these pontoons where boats could be tied up. So my jackstay line was running roughly parallel with the pontoons. So down I went, and the first thing you do is you go down the shot line, which is tied from the surface to the heavy weight on the bottom. Obviously, you're telling your supervisor that you've arrived on bottom, and we can assume it was about 3 meters deep, as these things generally are. Now, you need to search all around that heavy weight to start with, and actually pick it up and search under it, because again, you know, these things tell you that for sure, whatever you're looking for, if it was smaller, you've probably just put your big heavy weight straight on top of it, you know, and you carry out your search and go, no, it's not there, I can't find it, knowing that you then put the heavy weight directly on top of it, because of course that's what would happen. So yeah, you have to search all around your weight, you know, underneath it, potentially inside your jackstay line if it was up against a wall, for example, because if you run it alongside a wall, there's a risk again that you could put your line sort of right on top of it if it's small. If we're talking about a thin blade, for example, so generally we would set a line, you know, maybe a foot out from a wall if it was running parallel with the edge of a canal wall, for example, and then we would search up the inside first, because you have to make sure that you have not missed anything. And in extreme cases, although I can only think of it happening probably twice or something I had in the end about 330 operational dives. And probably on 2 of those dives, we were so sure, or we were told the information was so good, the item we were looking was in there, that once we'd done our search pattern and we put divers through and hadn't found it, we actually changed the pattern, came at it from a different angle, and went through it with another set of divers just to see. And I can tell you that on both those occasions, we didn't turn the item up. So we were sure that we hadn't missed it, and we were able to go back to the lead detective and say, I'm afraid your information's wrong. It's not in there, because we were pretty sure of our abilities if we were searching something. And as I say, very rare that we actually went back and sort of questioned ourselves and went through again. But we did on both those occasions and didn't turn up the item. So I go down to the bottom and I put a hand on. Now remember, there is no visibility at all. 0 visibility. It's all done by touch. And I know we've discussed it before and it's my pet hate. No, you can't use metal detectors because there's too much metal on the bottom. It goes off all the time. There is no torch powerful enough in the world to light up the water. It's just thick with black gloop. It's like almost like oily water. It's so black and solidified that you cannot see it and no light penetrates it. So it has to be done by touch. Generally, I had my eyes closed, and I think most of my colleagues did as well, because you couldn't see anyway, and you might as well just close your eyes and concentrate. And then it's once you've cleared around that way, it's, for me, generally it would be, it depends on which way you're coming at it, but let's say right hand on the jackstay, and now all that interests me for the hour that I'm diving is that kind of 2 or 3 foot wide area in front of me that I'm searching. When I've totally searched that and I'm completely happy, I move my hand forward that's on the jackstay 1 hand's width. So we're talking like 6 inches, something like that. And then I search again that 2 to 3 foot strip in front of me. And then I move my hand again 6 inches and search again. And there's always an overlap in there. So, if you've just found a bottle of brick or whatever, because you've only moved 6 inches forward, when you then search, you're clipping the edge of those things again. And that's good. That's reassuring from a search point of view, because you're overlapping and you're covering a bit of old ground as well, which is really what you want to do. That's the sort of icing on the cake to make sure you're not missing bits. And through you go, and you carry on, and it takes a while, very, very slow movement. And I carried on, and I got about halfway through the search, I suppose, and I got a pull on my line to come to the surface, which is unusual because generally, if you were diving, you were left to it. They realised you needed to concentrate, and unless there was a safety issue like a boat coming, they weren't going to disturb you. So I got a pull on my line to surface. So I came up, and my attendant, who's a good friend of mine, was very excited and was saying, "Did you see that? Did you feel anything?" And I was like, "No, not at all." And he was like, "Wow, it was a massive turtle." He said turtle, probably terrapin, that just surfaced just behind it. You must have disturbed it. Now, I can't remember what time of year it was. I think it was the summer. But certainly in a number of the waterways in London, and probably the same around the world, little Johnny's been given a terrapin for his birthday, and it's about 3 inches across, and it's really cute. One of these small, I'd say snapping turtles. They're not like the American ones that will sort of take your arm off, but they still have quite a decent nip on them as they get bigger. But so little Johnny gets his 3-inch wide terrapin for his birthday. Of course, 2 years later, this thing is considerably bigger, and now he's grown out of it. So what do? Do they hand it into a rescue centre? No, they just take it down the local pond or canal and tip it in. So on a sunny day in a lot of London's rivers and ponds and things, you can find terrapins on the surfaces, sort of basking in the sun. And now, because these things are left alone, they can live for years and they can get big. We've seen some that have been 2 or 3 foot long, absolutely huge things, and you're looking at the sort of snapping jaws on them, thinking, I don't fancy sticking my fingers anywhere near that. But of course, don't forget, we've got no visibility. And certainly on a number of occasions, I'd been searching through places, particularly in the winter, because I think in the winter they tend to hibernate. So they kind of burrow down into the mud. And you would find something that maybe initially felt like a bit of a rugby ball or sort of an American football, that sort of size. So you'd be thinking, what is that? And it's a bit down in the mud, and I've got to so you sort of half pick it out of the mud, and you're still trying to feel and think in your brain, what is that I'm feeling? I'm really not sure. And then suddenly it moves, it springs, pokes its legs out, and it's off swimming away, So to say that it would make you jump, would be an understatement. I mean, perhaps it was just me, perhaps no one else was bothered, but it certainly made me jump. And on this occasion, I've come to the surface, and my pal said, wow, you must have disturbed it. Massive, massive turtle, as he called it, came to the surface just behind you. Did you feel anything? I was like, no, not at all. So it must have been very nearby, and I disturbed it enough for it to come to the surface. Of course, the problem is I've now got another half an hour of diving to carry on. So back I go down to the bottom, and of course suddenly your quite confident search, where you've been pushing your hand forcefully down into the silt to feel for things, although don't forget that this is a fresh deposit of our leg, so it shouldn't be buried, it should be sitting on the surface, but you can't 100% be clear of that, because again you only needed a boat to start its prop up nearby to disturb some silt and sort of semi-cover it. We didn't know, so we generally didn't sort of scour the surface. You'd go down under the surface a bit. But of course now I've got half an hour, and every time you touch anything, a bottle of brick, oh, what's that? Kind of move your hand away, because you expect in your mind, it's this massive turtle, and it's got its huge powerful jaws open getting ready to chomp you, so it made for quite a nervous dive. But anyway, we continued on, and I didn't find it on my dive, and I'm pretty confident it wasn't there, because a leg is quite a big item for us to find, even if it was only from the knee down. But it's definitely one of those times, and there's been a few in my career, and we've probably discussed some already, and we may discuss some in the future, that you do kind of stop mid dive or mid whatever you're doing and thinking, what a crazy job. Other people go and work in a shop, or they're mechanics, they work in an office, they're a secretary, they're a teacher, they have normal jobs, and people know what those jobs involved. And you sort of have to take a second and think, if I explain to your average person on the street, here I am diving in a muddy canal amongst the snapping turtles, maybe a bit dramatic, but looking for a severed leg, what sort of job is that? Why can't I just have a normal job? What on earth are you doing? How did you get here? But it would make me chuckle, and you can see why, as a cop, you have to have a sense of humour. It just isn't going to work if you're wound up tight and there is no release, whether it's banter with your pals or whatever. Of course, unfortunately, sometimes that release becomes an excess, and we do see cops, unfortunately, some of their ways of coping is, alcoholism, gambling, whatever, not healthy things. So, yes, it was a bit of a strange dive, to say the least. Now, of course, you're dying to find out what happened, aren't you? Well, I can tell you, we dived the whole day and put through about 6 divers and completely covered the area, and really saturated the area that we'd been told it had been dropped in, and we didn't find it. So, we assumed our information was wrong, basically, because we were confident that we would have found it. And what happened was, about 2 days later, a member of the public called in, and the marine unit, the boats went up to collect it. It had been seen floating on the surface some way from where we were. And if you remember, we talked about the decomposition process and how bodies tend to bloat up and fill with gas, so they float to the surface after anything from 1 to 3 weeks, depending on whether it's summer or winter. But the same thing happens with a leg, although I hadn't tested the theory until now, because it was probably the first one when it was just a leg that had gone in. Although, and again, we may come on to this, dismembered bodies was quite a popular thing in the London area amongst the criminal underworld. And a number of times we found ourselves going to jobs. In fact, we had one particularly where a fisherman had actually caught a leg, and that started a search. And we went there and basically found the complete body. He had been dismembered, and we put this search through, and we had a tarpaulin laid out, and we basically got a limb out, and you were kind of looking at this jigsaw puzzle of body parts going, right, okay, we've got 2 legs, we're missing a head, a torso, and 2 arms. So the diver that was going in was looking for those things, and he was like, oh yeah, I've got an arm, and this is how it would go on. And again, one of those scenarios where you're making this body jigsaw up on a tarpaulin, all from poor Mr. Fisherman who's caught a leg to start with and is pretty shocked. So yeah, certainly a bit of a strange world. But anyway, this leg came to the surface and was recovered by our marine unit, who dealt with all the sort of on-surface type searches. And the leg was recovered. Now, what I don't know was actually what happened to the person who put it in there. There's probably a criminal offence in there somewhere. Certainly there's offences of disposing of a body unlawfully. Disposing of a leg unlawfully, would it come under that? Possibly, yeah. I mean, it's not an area of criminal law I'm massively familiar with. Again, by all means, if you are, make a comment on YouTube. But I'm thinking he probably lost his job. But you know, I don't actually know. So it's quite an interesting job, to say the least. We'll just finish up with because we're actually further through than I thought. Just a little funny one at the end, as we've got 5 minutes left. So we went out to this job. It was a murder, and the firearm that was used to shoot and kill the guy had been dumped into a canal. Very much a bread and butter job for us. We'd gone up to North London, and it was the summer holidays, which was always a bit of a shame, because what that meant was there was lots of bored, roaming kids about. So we'd set up our Jack's Day search, and we were searching for this gun, and we had a good information where it was. Of course, immediately you have 20 or 30 of the local kids descend on you in the canal. You know, what are you looking for, mate? You know, oh, wow, what's it like to be a diver? And so it would go on, and invariably you get the questions, you know, is there any sharks in there? That would come up quite often from the kids in on the canal. And on this occasion, it started because one of our guys got out, and he got out of his dry suit at the edge of the water, which was unusual. And as he got out, he had, you know, like long johns on, and I think either his long johns were pulled up or somehow his sort of calf was exposed, and he had a really substantial scar on the back of his leg. And one of the local kids saw it and said to him, "Wow, mister, you know, what's that from?" So, just joking as he was, the diver says to the kid, "Oh, it's a shark bite," you know. And the kid was like, "Wow, that's brilliant. Wow, that's amazing. You're a diver and you got a shark bite. Oh my God, that's brilliant," you know. And we chuckled, and that was kind of the end of it. Of course, the next day, the kid and his pals turn up and go, "So your shark bite, mister, did it come from here?" And one of the guys pipes up, "Oh yeah, there's plenty of canal sharks in here. Have you seen them? You know, do you live here?" And they were like, "Yeah, we live just here by the canal. But we didn't know there were sharks in there." "Yeah, canal sharks. Have you not heard of them?" No. So the kids said this was it. I mean, we thought it was good fun at the time, but unfortunately it spread. By the following day, we ended up with about 100 kids down there now, all looking for canal sharks. So we played along with it a bit. Now, I'm sure you're aware that divers' fins, you know, are flippers, as some people call them, which again is a bit of a pet hate. They're fins, not flippers. Would come to the surface occasionally and take off a fin and kind of slice it through the water so it looked a bit like a shark's fin, you know, because they're not dissimilar. And of course, every now and then you'd say to the kids, "Wow, did you see that?" You know, and they were like, "I saw something, you know, what was that?" You know, so I don't know, you know. And then even more amusingly, at the end of one of the days, one of the guys got out, and I'd never seen it before, but as he was de-kitting on the edge of the canal and he was taking his dive cylinders off and things and the harnesses, there was actually a small fish caught in one of the harnesses, and it was flapping around, and the kids were standing there and they saw it, and it dropped onto the floor. Of course, we plopped it back in and it swam off, and the kids were like, "What was that?" You know, and he was like, "Well, I think it was a baby canal shark." And of course they were like, "Oh, baby canal shark, we saw it, you know, everything you've told us is true." And again, it developed from there, where they said, we said, "Well, have you seen the canal shark eggs?" You know, and they were like, "No." You know, they're like, "Oh yeah, the canal sharks come out at night and they lay their eggs, you know, along the hedgerow here, you know, and along the edge of the wall." "No, they don't." You know, go, "Yeah, sometimes you find them, although it's quite rare." What they didn't know was the day before we'd cooked up a load of boiled eggs and we took them with us and we'd hidden them in the hedgerow and along the edges of their houses. So of course we said to the kids, "Well, see if you can find them. Sometimes you can see them." Of course the kids went off, and you should have seen their faces when they found these eggs. You know, they just thought it was the most fantastic thing ever. And professional, well, maybe not, but you know, it was a tough job, and sometimes you need to have that bit of banter. And to be honest with you, I think the kids loved it as much as we did. So they were off and running for canal sharks. What we were slightly worried about was that it was going to make an appearance in the local press, and then the next thing you know, it'd be a police spokesman said there's canal sharks, you know. But it never made it that far, thankfully. It just stayed as a bit of a local legend with the kids. But they were always looking out for canal shark eggs and any sort of splash in the water, or if the diver came up, you know, and there was, a bit of disturbance in the water, you say, oh, I think, there's one after him, and all this. So it was good fun. We enjoyed it. And I think the kids did too. So a bit of an amusing one to finish off with there. So a bit of a strange collection of stories for you today, but hopefully you enjoyed it. Perhaps not quite as depressing as my normal stuff, but thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be on to some more next week. Take it easy and have a good week. Cheers. Bye.